Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the Comic Book Network. I'm your host Ian, and today I will be going it alone. Yep, that's right. Aside from our loyal partner Jeffrey, who's not usually much of a talker seeing as he cannot talk, I am entirely by myself, which is kind of good for me, or so my therapist says. He actually recommended that I cut myself off from society and no longer try to go into any normal or conventional areas, public spaces, conventions, or anything else. He kind of hates me in that regard. But today I'd like to talk about something near, dear, and clear to my heart, which is Image Comics. They are growing at an extremely fast rate. They have great artists, they have great writers, they have great series, and this is the company that's reaching the same levels as Marvel and DC. They've been around for a while now, but they still don't have the sort of brand awareness that Marvel and DC do. Nonetheless, they are growing by a substantial amount, and I'd like to tell you a little bit of my theory as to why. So first off, we're going to get into their sort of individuality. Image isn't tied to any one subject or genre like Marvel and DC are. Whereas Marvel and DC usually focus on superheroes and those sorts of characters to act one, as sort of mascots, and two, they're just what's expected from Marvel and DC. It's hard for those two companies to really come out with anything new or anything different. When they do, they have to stretch it. They have to create something like, say, the new Visions series from All New, All Different. They have to use the characters they've already established as superheroes and villains, but twist it in a different way. Now, Image doesn't have that constriction on them. They can go into crazier realms like Saga, where superheroes are really not there or not a factor in it. They have done superhero comics before and they've done it beautifully, but they don't have to keep beating the dead horse. Not to say that Marvel or DC is a dead horse by any means. They're doing pretty well if you haven't checked the numbers lately. But it just adds a different layer when you can fully explore all these different worlds and different dimensions outside of just, oh, I have superpowers and this guy is a new superhero who got bitten by a radioactive snail and now his name is Escargot and he parades around the city secreting slime and stopping criminals at a very, very slow but gradual and kind pace. That's not necessary. We've got heroes built for humor. We've got protagonists who are absolutely insane, as in the case of the Max series. And they just have a lot more room to explore what they want to explore rather than forcing it to follow these sort of superhero tropes that have been established already. Another great thing about Image is the characters themselves. Like I said, they don't have to have powers. They can be a lot more relatable, and they can achieve that goal more easily because they're actual humans and they don't have spider powers and they don't go traipsing around the alleyways at night looking to deal justice to the local criminal element. They can just really get in to what they like to get into, and make characters who are really relatable as a result. Like in the case of Invincible, they have this great hero who's really down to earth, and you see his emotional development over time, and you don't have to. He, provided he is a superhero sort, so perhaps that wasn't the best example of a relatable character, but even in this superhero world that they've constructed, it's more of a relatable, real issue sort of comic. But to bring it to a more personal level, a more regular people level, we can turn to something like Outcast, which is done great in providing these characters that have rich subplots behind them, and they've got these tragic stories where they interact with other characters just in a crazily relatable way, and one that can almost bring you to tears. It's great to have that sort of freedom, and it's great to have characters who you can instantly connect with because they're just like you. And continuing with the topic of freedom, when it comes to Image Comics, or when it comes to Marvel and DC Comics, you've got to keep it really PG, keep it happy-go-lucky, and obviously writers can stretch this in series like the Punisher Max series or things like that, but for the most part, they have to tie it down to a very basic and almost childlike setting, and their position in the spotlight makes them very prone to like social justice warriors or angry parents or what have you. Right? Image doesn't really have that pressure on them. They've always just done what they want to do, writing comics for the sake of comics, and that's produced some great stories, albeit some more graphic and mildly disturbing to the point of wanting to cry yourself to sleep. But even so, it's just a broader section that they can really advertise to and appeal to. And it's nice to see that even though Marvel and DC have done consistently good jobs of creating superheroes and creating that sort of thing, that sort of childlike, amazing thing, we can have a place that's more graphic, more, not necessarily more violent. I don't want to say that that's the appeal of it, but it's not so comically unrealistic and ridiculously unfathomable that you are pulled out of the story, or it doesn't explore those sort of fantasy elements necessarily. The good thing is they have the freedom to explore those elements if they choose to, like in the Shudder title, where they pretty much go off the rails in terms of just crazy characters and fantastic areas. But regardless, they have the ability to tie it back down to real life instead, and tie it down to a more graphic side of real life that's nevertheless part of real life. And that's really a good thing in modern comics, and it makes them so successful. And it's another big reason why I'm looking forward to their take in comic media as a whole, like movies, TV shows, and the like. I feel like if Marvel and DC are sort of the Fox and ABCs of television, Image is coming with the HBO or the Netflix of TV shows, where they have the freedom to do things and try things that those standard companies wouldn't necessarily be able to do. Excuse me. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't demean them as companies. They still have high quality content, and they still have done really well with what they can do. But it does mean that those companies have parameters and such that Image just doesn't have. And I think that's what makes it appealing to some great artists and great writers, and sort of helps their comics in that they're a safe haven for these writers who aren't looking to necessarily go into superhero stuff and want to look more at the indie side of life. And in that way, they're able to get some great creative teams together. And oh man, I forgot what I was going to say. Jeffrey, do you have anything to add? He doesn't. He is very bad at sign language. I think he only took a rudimentary course, which is pretty unstandard for a guy of his age. I mean, he's 34 and he's been deaf, blind, and legally dead for the last 20 years. So you'd think he would have picked up some things on the way. Apparently, he did not. But I think that, bringing it back to the point, that is what makes Image a top contender, because they can provide the things that Marvel and DC just don't have the freedom to do because of their audiences. Not because Marvel and DC are afraid to do certain things, but because they're held to a standard, one that Image warped. See, Image from the get-go hasn't shown itself to be your typical comic company, and as such haven't acquired a group of comic fans who are expecting, the great superhero, clean, pure justice for everyone type of comics that Marvel and DC provide. Which is why you can see some of DC and Marvel's extensions where they try to go into these less superheroic genres, and they ultimately fail, or they get canceled, or they just sort of fade out into obscurity, because they just don't have the audience for that and haven't established themselves as people or companies who will endorse that and who will follow through with that. And that's what's led to such great titles as Saga and Invincible, Outcast, Shudder, all those great comics. The Max, that's another great one that I enjoyed wholeheartedly. But I'm glad to see that Image is right up there with Marvel and DC, at least in the realm of comics, in the realm of those who enjoy and consume comics outside of just their movie and show forms. So yeah, that's about all I have to say about that. I think now is as good a time as any to move on to my weekly reads. It'll be a little bit shorter than usual because obviously we don't have the back and forth so much, and I'm not the greatest at back and forth amongst myself. even though I do have 7 different personalities according to my therapist, who I mentioned before, but only as my other personality. So, this week, I actually got to read the most recent episode of Outcast, or issue of Outcast, which is a comic series I've been thoroughly enjoying. It's got great, not necessarily art, but great moods with the art. The line drawings can be kind of, sketchy, kind of strange, kind of off-putting, but it does create a great mood for the comic, and the coloration especially has been great. It's been enjoyable, and it's been fun to read. And the characters, they're so interesting. The old man, the old evil man, always creeps me out, and I'm excited to see what they're going to do with him and how it's going to culminate, because all this time they've been setting up this outcast thing, and we are not at all introduced to what the outcast necessarily means, but hopefully we're coming to a climax soon, at least in that storyline, and I hope it'll continue far past that. But right now I am just really wanting to figure out what's going on. Other than that, it's got a great cast of characters, like I said, who can be relatable in a very non-superheroic way. It's got that sort of creepy small town feel of like a horror movie, but with characters who you can connect to, not just throwaways like most horror movies. Another read of the week, which I've been enjoying, is Doctor Strange, issue 5. This one really took a turn for the strange, if you will pardon the pun, that I totally intentionally made. But it showed us a little bit of behind the scenes of how Doctor Strange is going about surviving all of these crazy things that he should probably not be surviving. And it's kind of a haunting scene. I won't give it away necessarily, but it is a memorable and haunting scene that I look forward to exploring, because it leaves you with a very intrigued feeling, a very nervous feeling. Other than that, the art has been great the whole series. It's been kind of on and off since I first heard it announced, the series announced. I've been kind of on and off with the art, but it's definitely fitting of the comic series, and it's got some great colors with it. Like I said, I guess I'm obsessed with colors or something, but it switches between these beautiful shades of black and white to brilliant, vibrant blotches of color. And Wong, I enjoy reading about. He's mentioned frequently in Doctor Strange comics, but it seems like he doesn't often get as big a spotlight as he does in this comic, and that's a very interesting dynamic to see as well. And I'm enjoying the whole magic is dying theme that's sort of arising in Marvel, and I'm kind of wondering what implications that could have with the upcoming Civil War II event, which is coming this either this month or next. I can't quite remember. But either way, it's an interesting prospect, and I can't wait to see what they do with it. All right, so segueing in here to our final segments. Can't believe we made it this far. This is our question of the week, or letter of the week, as we'll call it. Remember, you can always type in, email in to thecomicbooknetwork@gmail.com. That's thecomicbooknetwork@gmail.com. You can bring in your questions, your concerns, your hatred, your lawsuits, preferably not lawsuits, because we've already got just a terrible pile of those. Spam ads, those are very frequent in their appearances. But here's our question of the week. It's, what is your favorite underrated comic? This is kind of a tough one. I'm going to go with the Superior Foes of Spider-Man. And I'll tell you why. It wasn't necessarily a failure in terms of critical success. It did win a few awards from what I remember, and it's a great series that sold fairly well. But it's often overlooked in terms of a good comedy series, which is exactly what it is. It's got precise and witty humor. It's got a great premise of the Sinister Six reforming with a bunch of C-listers. And it's the premise is great. The characters are funny, and what I like best about it is that it takes full control of comics as a medium. It uses all the visual comedy and interpanel jokes that it can get, which is something you don't see a lot, and it's really a good take on a comedy series. There's so many boundless opportunities that comics present for comedy and for directly talking to the audience or making subtle references through visual art and using that as a tool for comedy other than just the words, just the actions. And in that way, I feel like it's vastly underrated and should be looked to as a great example of what comedy comics can really be and what extent you can go to with humor in comics. So that's about all, guys. I thank you for joining me on this 4th episode. Remember, you can find us on YouTube, or you can listen in on this little app called Spreaker, which will allow you to play it in the background. Of course, if you're listening in on Spreaker right now, you already know that. If you're listening in on YouTube, though, I encourage you to check it out. Feel free to subscribe, leave a like, whatever. I won't beg, but Jeffrey here does constantly, with his eyes, of course, the eyes that are curiously not there. But, every little bit helps. We really thank you guys for supporting us as we get started and get through the sort of awkward phase that we're going through a little bit. But every single episode has been more and more fun for me, at least, to record. And we hope you guys have had equal fun listening to it. And maybe even learned a thing or two. Um, Ethan shall be back next week. We apologize that he was not here. He had to take a little vacation, and that's a good thing. You know what? You guys should be happy for him. You should be on your feet cheering. Really. I can't believe it. I can't believe anyone would have the audacity. Okay, maybe it's just me. But he'll be back next week. I hope you guys are there with us too. Thank you for everything, and this is the Comic Book Network signing out.